Hello again from from southeastern Finland in northern Europe. I'm still on summer holiday here and will be until July the 23rd, 2019, when I will leave for my current country of residence, the Philippines. In this video, I'm going to selectively cover the important events, especially from a political and military standpoint of August 1939, which was officially the last month before the Second World War broke out officially in Europe. The tensions between Germany, Britain, France, Poland, and the Soviet Union, to name several countries, were increasing. On Tuesday, August the 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany forbade the sale of lottery tickets to Jews. On Wednesday, August the 2nd, 1939, a German Jewish physicist who had been forced to flee to the United States because otherwise he would surely have been arrested by the Nazi Germans, and in the worst case scenario he could have been executed because of his Jewish origin and his very likely refusal to cooperate with the Nazi German leadership's offer of helping to develop deadlier weapons. Mr. Albert Einstein signed a letter written by Leo Szilard, addressed to the US President Franklin Roosevelt, warning that Germany might develop an atomic weapon and suggesting that the United States should start its own nuclear program. The letter would prompt President Roosevelt to take action and eventually result in the Manhattan Project, whose two concrete results were the two atomic bombs, which forced Japan to surrender at last in August 1945, marking the end of the Second World War. The first one was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, the second one on the city of Nagasaki, in both cases resulting in the instant death of tens of thousands of people, and then in the gradual death of many more during the ensuing years and decades from radiation. The British Prime Minister and Conservative Party's leader, Neville Chamberlain, introduced a motion to adjourn the House of Commons until October the 3rd. It passed 250 to 132, and an attempted amendment by the opposition to shorten the adjournment's length to August the 21st was defeated. Over 30 Conservatives supported the shorter recess and expressed their displeasure by abstaining from voting. One of them was former Cabinet Minister Winston Churchill, and another was John Ronald Cartland, who during a speech prophetically said, "We are in the situation that within a month we may be going to fight and we may be going to die." On Thursday, August 3rd, 1939, the medical licenses of all Jewish doctors in Nazi Germany were nullified as a part of the process of making the German Jewish minority an effectively disenfranchised ethnic group or ethno-racial group, because the Nazi Germans like to classify people on a racial basis more than on an ethnic basis, especially if they were not so-called Aryans, in other words, Germanic peoples. So with no official positions, or at least no respectable official positions, they already had lost their German citizenship, I think, due to the Nuremberg laws of 1935. It was much easier to round them up and to put them to death on a massive scale. And this, of course, would be repeated in those European countries which Germany would conquer starting in September 1939. On August the 4th, 1939, which was a Friday, a Chinese mob in Tianjin attacked offices of the British International Export Corporation, smashing furniture and throwing equipment and other equipment and throwing it into the High River. The British said that the Japanese had instigated the attack. On Saturday, August the 5th, 1939, Poland sent the free city of Danzig a note demanding that interference with Polish customs guards on the border with East Prussia and therefore Germany cease, in other words, end. 13 women known as the Las 13 Rosas, the 13 Rosas, were executed in the fascist far-right Francoist Spain for aiding a military rebellion. On Sunday, August the 6th, 1939, Poland celebrated the Polish Legion's 25th anniversary of entry into the First World War. Marshal Edward Rydz-Śmigły, who was one of Poland's most powerful political and military leaders at the time, since Poland had been a military dictatorship since 1926, when the late, already by that time, by May 1935, deceased Marshal Józef Piłsudski had overthrown a democratically elected civilian government. But this Marshal Rydz-Śmigły told a cheering crowd of 100,000 that violence inflicted by force must be resisted by force, and that Poland's conduct with regard to Danzig would be adjusted to the conduct of the other side, meaning Germans. On Monday, August the 7th, 1939, a Swedish businessman, Birger Dalerus, arranged a meeting at his house in Schleswig-Holstein, northern Germany, between his friend Hermann Göring, who was a German military and political leader and marshal, and 7 important British businessmen in an effort to avoid war. The meeting went in a friendly way, and Mr. Dalerus believed that an informal agreement was in place to hold a peace conference. Danzig rejected the Polish demand of August the 5th, refusing to recognize untrained Polish officials as supervisors of Danzig customs. On Tuesday, August the 8th, 1939, 1,300 warplanes filled the skies over Britain on the first of several days of air defense tests. On Wednesday, August the 9th, 1939, Italy published a law introducing fines for anyone moving from the countryside to a city of 25,000 people or more, unless they had already worked in those cities. The Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini had recently advised moving out of the cities if possible to avoid potential bombing in the event of war. On Thursday, August the 10th, 1939, citizens of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, which now corresponds with the territory of the Czech Republic, by the way, and which had been annexed directly by the Nazi Germans in March 1939, some 5.5 months, or 5 to 5.5 months after the annexation of the Czechoslovak western border regions known as the Sudetenland, were ordered to turn in all arms and explosives to the government, and they were threatened by capital punishment should they fail to do so. On Friday, August the 11th, 1939, starting at midnight, half of England went dark for 4 hours in a test to determine how effectively Britain could shroud itself from enemy planes. The Italian Foreign Minister, Mr. Galeazzo Ciano, went to Salzburg Austria, or now then officially Ostmark, after the Anschluss or German annexation of Austria, to begin 3 days of talks with his German colleague, Mr. Joachim von Ribbentrop. Foreign Minister Czarno soon realized that Germany was serious in its willingness to risk starting World War II. This was not welcome news for the Italians, who were unprepared for a war and did not think that the Axis powers in Europe, consisting of Germany and Italy at the time, would fare well if Britain and France came to the aid of Poland. On August the 12th, 1939, which was a Saturday, Foreign Ministers Czarno and von Ribbentrop rode to the Berghof and met with Adolf Hitler. Berghof was Hitler's resort in Bavaria, southern Germany. Right on the German-Austrian border, which of course then was the former German-Austrian border because of the Anschluss, and met the Nazi German dictator Adolf Hitler, who confidently asserted that the war against Poland would be a localized war. But he was probably lying, because he must have been intelligent enough strategically to realize that the Western powers would declare war on Germany, and especially if Germany started to expand westward, they would definitely fight against Germany. And the British Empire was still a huge empire, since most of its colonies had not yet been granted independence, and those colonies would automatically be at war with Germany should Britain declare war against or on Germany. The British-French military mission to the Soviet Union began negotiations in Moscow in a desperate attempt to form a military alliance with the Soviet Union, so that Germany would face an enemy both in the west and in the east, and so that Poland would stand a greater chance of resisting an impending German invasion. But since Poland refused to allow the Soviet military troops inside its borders, even for defensive purposes, due to its fear, or its military civilian government's fear, that the Soviet Union would use a general war or the Second World War as a pretext for re-annexing the old Russian areas, Russian imperial areas of or regions of Belarus or White Russia and the Ukraine. Already because of that, the Polish government refused to even contemplate allowing Soviet soldiers inside its borders. On Sunday, August the 13th, 1939, Foreign Minister Czarno returned to Italy, convinced that the Germans had already decided to start the Second World War and that nothing good could be done to deter them. He wrote in his diary, "I am certain that even if the Germans were given more than they ask for, they would attack just the same, because they are possessed by the demon of destruction." On Monday, August the 14th, 1939, the US President Franklin Roosevelt announced that he would proclaim Thanksgiving to be moved up 1 week from the last Thursday of November, November the 30th in that year, to the next to last Thursday, meaning November the 23rd that year. He explained that stores had requested the change to give them extra time to sell merchandise between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Additionally, workers had complained of the long stretch of time between Labor Day in early September, meaning it would be over 2.5 months, and Thanksgiving. On Tuesday, August the 15th, 1939, Indian troops arrived to Egypt to strengthen British forces there. U-boat or German submarine boat commander Admiral Karl Dönitz received a coded instruction for his forces to be put out to sea at once in anticipation of the impending outbreak of war. On Wednesday, August the 16th, 1939, a Polish soldier was killed 20 yards or about 18 meters inside the Danzig border. According to Polish sources, this soldier had crossed over by mistake and had not been given any warning but had been shot on the spot. In retaliation, Polish military guards were given orders to shoot on sight any uniformed German or Danziger, that is a native of Danzig, in Polish territory. The British-French mission arrived to Moscow. On Thursday, August the 17th, 1939, Hitler closed the border with Poland at Upper Silesia. Interestingly enough, a Finnish language version of the Chronicle of the 20th century, covering the events from January 1900 to, August 1986, claimed that Poland had instead closed the border at Upper Silesia, or the slight border traffic there, because of the persistent incidents, skirmishes along the border. This was anyway one of the symptoms of an escalating tension between Germany and Poland. The semi-official Polish newspaper Kurier Poranny demanded confiscation of property held by German citizens in Poland in retaliation for the confiscation of property owned by Polish Jews in Germany. On Friday, August the 18th, 1939, the German Interior Ministry ordered all physicians, nurses, and midwives to report children under the age of 3 who showed signs of severe mental or physical disability, which was the first step in the Nazi Germany's child euthanasia program. The idea was basically that those who were considered physically inferior and in some cases also emotionally inferior were to be put to death. On Saturday, August the 19th, 1939, the Nazi German dictator Hitler received a message from his ambassador in Moscow reporting that the Soviets were prepared to meet the German Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop on August the 27th or 28th to negotiate and sign a non-aggression pact. Hitler welcomed the news but wanted the date of von Ribbentrop's visit to be brought forward because he intended to originally to start the Second World War through the invasion of Poland already on August the 26th. At the last minute, he then rescheduled the start of the invasion for September the 1st. A secret meeting of the Politburo, which was the informal Soviet government, an organ of the inner core circle of the Soviet Communist Party's leader, was allegedly held where the Soviet communist dictator Joseph Stalin outlined the Soviet Union's strategy in the upcoming war. Dictator Stalin supposedly said that the war among the Western powers, meaning Britain and France mainly in Europe, should go on as long as possible so all belligerents or participants in the war would be weakened, creating an ideal opportunity for Soviet expansion. Italy, as one of the steps which would by 1942 result in the start of the full-scale massive execution by various means of European Jews, meaning the Holocaust, barred entry to Jews from Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Romania. On Sunday, August the 20th, 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union shocked the world, except for those observers of international politics who had been realistic, when a trade pact between the two countries was announced. The Tientsin blockade ended when the British handed over the accused killers whom the Japanese had wanted all along. They would later be executed by the Japanese. The handover coincided with a massive flood that submerged the streets and knocked out the city's power. From the Berghof, Hitler sent a message to Stalin proposing that von Ribbentrop go to Moscow by August the 23rd in view of the international situation. Battles of Kharkhin Gol, Soviet General Georgy Zhukov launched a new attack with over 200 aircraft and as many as 500 tanks. On Monday, August the 21st, 1939, Stalin agreed to receive von Ribbentrop in Moscow on August the 23rd. The Soviet Union informed the British-French mission that no military pact was possible unless Poland consented to having the Red Army, meaning the Soviet army, pass through its territory, and since the Polish government categorically rejected any such suggestion, the negotiations were therefore ended. Charlie Chaplin, a famous British-born comedian of Jewish descent, delayed production on his new film, tentatively called The Dictators, due to Europe's uncertain situation. In that parody, he starred as Adenoid Hünkel or Hinkel, clearly mocking and imitating Adolf Hitler. And then there was another actor who then mockingly imitated the Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. On August the 22nd, 1939, which was a Tuesday, Hitler gave the Ober-Salzberg speech to the commanders of the Wehrmacht, the German ground forces, detailing Poland's pending invasion and plans for the Poles' extermination. Members of the British Parliament were summoned back to London for a special session on Thursday. On August the 23rd, 1939, which was a Wednesday, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, named after the Soviet and German foreign ministers of that time, was signed. It contained a 10-year non-aggression or non-invasion treaty between Germany and the Soviet Union. Both countries' military and political leaders meant that, or realized that it was just designed to buy both nations time before they would then face off in Eastern Europe for the control of continental Europe, at least, and if not even of Eurasia or a large part of it, given the Soviet Union's stretching from Eastern Europe all the way to the Asian Far East. This pact included the secret clause whereby the two countries agreed effectively to divide up Poland, establishing the spheres of influence. The Soviet sphere of influence initially included Bessarabia or northeastern Romania, which currently comprises at least most of the territory of Moldova. Then eastern Poland, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. After the successful German-Soviet invasion and occupation of Poland, also Lithuania was moved into the Soviet sphere of influence. And then in both spheres of influence, the superpowers were given basically a free hand to decide what to do with the civilians and soldiers there, resulting in massive executions and other ways of exterminating them, and then massive deportations, especially in the Soviet sphere of influence, and especially in the three Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, starting there in June 1941. On Thursday, August the 24th, 1939, the British Parliament passed the Emergency Powers Defence Act, giving the government broad powers in order to conduct war effectively. President Roosevelt appealed to the Italian King Victor Emmanuel III to formulate proposals for a pacific solution of the present crisis. Probably a goodwill gesture. I want to assume that President Roosevelt honestly wanted to at least postpone this awful impending war, but he must have realized that it had little practical significance since after the fascist takeover of political power in Italy between 1922 and 1924, King Victor Emmanuel III had been effectively reduced to the status of a figurehead king with little effective political power. And this would remain the situation until the summer of 1943, when the Allies launched an attack on Sicily, Italy's southernmost major island, resulting in the temporary overthrow of Mussolini, who was then in or around September 1943 rescued by a group of German soldiers and then transported by airplane to northern Italy, where he became the remaining fascist Italy's titular head of state with little or no effective political power. Pope Pius XII made a radio address to the entire world pleading for peace. The danger is imminent, but there is yet time, he said. Nothing is lost with peace, or maybe with war. Let men return to mutual understanding. Let them begin negotiations anew, conferring with goodwill and with respect for reciprocal rights. They will find that to sincere and conscientious negotiators, an honorable solution is never precluded. Marshal Hermann Göring of Germany asked his Swedish businessman friend, Mr. Birger Dalerus, to go to London as an unofficial envoy. Sweden, of course, had long practiced in the military and diplomatic situations of Europe an official neutrality. To tell the British to enter negotiations as soon as possible. Over the next several days, Mr. Dalerus would indeed shuttle back and forth between London and Berlin, relaying off-the-record messages separate from those delivered through official channels. Royal Auxiliary Air Force and Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve were embodied in Britain, merged into the Royal Air Force, and brought to active service because the British political and military leaders realized that war was imminent. Okay. And then on Friday, August the 25th, 1939, Germany, of course, under the direct or indirect orders of its Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler, made a very important decision given the impending outbreak of the Second World War and the resulting need for secrecy and censorship. It cut off all international telecommunication. In other words, it became at least officially impossible to make phone calls from Germany to other countries, to make radio broadcasts from other countries to Germany, and likewise to send telegrams from Germany to other countries. Hitler notified his Italian colleague fascist dictator Mussolini that war with Poland was imminent. At 12:45 p.m. Central European Time, Hitler summoned the British ambassador to Germany, Sir Neville Henderson, and talked with him for about an hour. He said it was necessary to solve the Polish question once and for all, and offered to make a pact with Britain guaranteeing the empire's existence and potentially leading to an agreement on armaments limitation in the future. Well, Ambassador Henderson probably was sufficiently schooled diplomatically and in foreign policy not to take such promises by Hitler very seriously, given that Hitler had promised to guarantee the independence and good relations with Germany of his native land Austria in 1936, and had broken that promise with the forced Anschluss or annexation of Austria in March 1938. He had pretended to assure the continued independence and security of Czechoslovakia, and then had carved it up in two sets, starting with the Munich Agreement at the end of September 1938, whereby he had, under the threat of invasion, forced Czechoslovakia's Western friends or allies, Britain and France, to agree to the annexation by Germany of Czechoslovakia's heavily German-speaking border regions in the west, known as the Sudetenland, and then in the middle of March 1939, swallowing up the rest of Czechoslovakia with only a few exceptions. Southern Slovakia would go to Hungary. Poland had received the tiny region of Cieszyn or Cieszyn in October 1938. And then, Hungary had received also Carpatho-Ruthenia, but most of what was once Czechoslovakia was occupied by Germany, although in order to appease the Slovak nationalists and separatists, Slovakia was granted a nominal independence under the Nazi German hegemony. At 3:02 p.m. Central European Time, Hitler gave the order to invade Poland on August the 26th, which he would at the last moment postpone by 6 days to the morning of September the 1st, 1939. Mussolini sent a telegram to Hitler informing him that Italy would remain neutral in a war between Germany and Poland, as his close political advisor, Foreign Minister Chana, had already implied or knew Italy was not yet ready for full participation in the Second World War. At 5:30 p.m., Hitler met the French ambassador Robert Coulondre, who told him that if Poland was attacked, France would help it. Poland and Britain signed the Agreement of Mutual Assistance, formalizing Britain's declaration of support for Poland on March the 31st. This declaration stated that Britain would help Poland to defend its territorial integrity and independence. At 6 p.m. sharp, the German Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop arrived with the news of the British-Polish treaty. Hitler decided, after hearing about that, to postpone the invasion of Poland. Mr. Dalerus arrived to London and relayed the German message to Lord Halifax, who said official channels were open, thanked Mr. Dalerus for his efforts, and assured him that his services were no longer needed. Later that evening, when Dalerus telephoned Göring, the German marshal, to let him know, Göring was adamant that Dalerus had to do everything possible to arrange a conference between Britain and Germany. They must have had some kind of special hotline, because already on early on August the 25th, 1939, Germany had cut off its international telecommunications. But hotlines may still have existed. Then the Jabłonków incident in southern Poland, where a group of German agents who had not yet been informed of Hitler's last-minute decision to postpone the invasion of Poland by 6 days to September the 1st, attacked a rail station in Mosti overnight, but the Polish soldiers stationed there repelled them. And when the Polish officials asked their German counterparts who was behind this incident, the Germans lied to the Poles that supposedly some insane individual had instigated the attack. In reality, it was had been ordered directly or indirectly by Hitler, but since Hitler had decided to postpone at the last minute or close just several hours from the starting hour of proposed starting hour, the invasion of Poland until September the 1st, and these units had not been informed, they had gone ahead with the attack. 5 people were killed and 70 were injured by an IRA or Irish Republican Army bomb explosion in Coventry, to the north of London, in England. The Louvre, Paris's most famous art gallery or museum, was closed to the public officially for repair work, so its art treasures could be packed up and transported to secret locations for safekeeping, because also the French government now was preparing for an imminent sudden start to the Second World War. On Saturday, August the 26th, 1939, the Cvetković-Maček Agreement established the Banovina of Croatia in Yugoslavia. The 1939 Nuremberg rally, scheduled to begin on September the 2nd, was postponed indefinitely because the Second World War was about to break out in Europe. Mussolini did express his desire to have Italy march side by side with Germany. Attached to the message, however, was a long list of materials which Italy would require to fight a war and needed Germany to provide, a list so long that Mussolini knew Germany could in no way supply it with the resources that were then available to Germany. But one of the motivations for Germany to conquer the Soviet Union, or at least a major portion of it, was to get more of these resources: metallic ores, coal, oil, grain, and so forth. And then Romania, which would join Germany officially in 1940 or 1941 as an ally, had Ploiești oil fields, which Hitler, of course, wanted to keep firmly under German control. And given the fact that Romania was situated in, and is situated in, southeastern Europe, and was a neighboring country of the then Soviet Union, he considered it critical that the Ploiești oil fields remain under German control, directly or indirectly, in order to help Germany fuel its many military vehicles. When the German officials asked the Italian ambassador when the delivery was expected, he replied immediately before the beginning of hostilities, leaving no room for negotiation on the matter. Neville Henderson flew back to London to relay Hitler's offer to the British government. Nazi Germany announced rationing for shoes, textiles, and certain food items. Every person in the country would receive a rationing card in order to make purchases. Mr. Dalerus met Lord Halifax for a second time and convinced him to write a letter expressing Britain's desire to reach a peaceful settlement with Germany. Mr. Dalerus then flew back to Berlin and gave the letter to Göring that night. He declared that Hitler must be informed immediately of its contents. Mr. Dalerus accepted Marshal Göring's invitation to come to the Chancellery and meet Hitler for the first time, although it was so late at night. German submarine U-43 was commissioned. On Sunday, August the 27th, 1939, Hitler was woken up just after midnight and met the Swedish businessman and informal diplomat Dalerus and Goering. Dalerus later recalled Hitler as appearing glassy-eyed and highly agitated, at one point going on a bizarre, rambling monologue, repetitively asserting that Germany would win a rapid war and he would build U-boats and airplanes. Hitler then calmed down and laid out a set of proposals more detailed than Ambassador Henderson had been given, which included the annexation of Danzig and the Polish corridor. Mr. Dalerus then flew back to London, conferred with Halifax and Prime Minister Chamberlain, and then flew back to Germany that same day to relay Britain's mixed reaction to the proposals. I'll have to then find out Lord Halifax's official position. Was he the Foreign Secretary or someone else? Yes, Edward Wood, the first Earl of Halifax, who, yes, was the British Secretary of State for War, in other words, War Minister. Or, sorry, he was the British Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, or Foreign Secretary, meaning Foreign Minister. Sorry. He had served as War Secretary in 1935. Sorry. The Heinkel HE-178, the world's first aircraft to fly under turbojet power, had its first flight in Rostock Marine Air, Germany. The pilot was Mr. Erich Wachsitz. On Monday, August 28, 1939, the Tarnów rail station bomb attack was carried out in southern Poland. It was one of the series of some 21 attacks which were carried out between August the 26th and August the 31st, 1939, along the German-Polish border. And the plan was to make Poland seem like the aggressor. In other words, that Poland supposedly would already have started to invade Germany, and therefore Germany would be supposedly morally entitled to invade Poland. In these attacks, there were groups of specially trained Nazi German SS soldiers who were dressed in the Polish army's uniforms in order to make them look like Polish soldiers. They randomly fired shots on the Polish-German border and pretended to attack buildings on the border, also broke up objects of property on the border, and then retreated to the German side, leaving behind the bodies of deceived concentration camp prisoners who had been lied to, promised freedom should they cooperate in these fake attacks along the Polish-German border. Hitler had given the SS organization's chairman, Mr. Heinrich Himmler, the order to prepare and carry out through these special SS men's units these attacks in order to make Poland appear as the aggressor, whom then Germany would supposedly justly retaliate to by invading its territory. In this bomb attack, a German agent left the bomb, which killed 20 and wounded 35. Neville Henderson flew back to Berlin with his government's official reply. Britain was prepared to take Hitler's proposals as subjects for discussion and agreed that there had to be settlement of differences between Germany and Poland, but noted that everything turned upon the nature of the settlement, and the method by which it was to be reached. Germany was reminded that the British government had obligations to Poland, referring to the military treaty that the two nations had signed. And they would honor those obligations. They could not, for any advantage offered to Great Britain, acquiesce in a settlement which put in jeopardy the independence of a state, meaning Poland, to whom they had given their guarantee. Britain suggested that the German and Polish governments start direct discussions which would aim at producing an agreement which would safeguard Poland's essential interests and secure the settlement by an international guarantee. The reply concluded with a warning that failure to reach a settlement would ruin the hopes of better understanding between Germany and Britain, would bring the two countries into conflict, and might well plunge the whole world into war. And the last statement was eerie and even prophetic. Such an outcome would be a calamity without parallel in history. Well, up to that time. Or up to 1945, but now, when the Third World War breaks out in full force, it will be a much, much deadlier war than the Second World War was, because there are weapons of mass destruction which either did not even exist by 1945 or were just in an embryonic, primitive stage of development. Hitler read a German translation of the British government's note. He was notorious for lacking linguistic skills beyond German, apparently, and told Henderson he was willing to negotiate, but that Poland could not be reasonable. Ambassador Henderson firmly replied that Hitler would have to choose between war with Poland or friendship with Britain. Hitler said he would prepare a written reply of his own. The border between Germany and France was closed. On Tuesday, August the 29th, 1939, Prime Minister Chamberlain addressed the House of Commons in London on the international situation and spoke in general terms of the discussions that had been going on with Germany. The British people are said sometimes to be slow to make up their minds, but having made them up, they do not readily let go, concluded Prime Minister Chamberlain. The issue of peace or war is still undecided, and we still will hope and still will work for peace. But we will abate no jot of our resolution to hold fast to the line which we have laid down for ourselves. The puppet leader of Slovakia, Jozef Tiso, declared martial law there. Articles were posted ordering Slovaks to accept German currency and furnish food to the German soldiers here to protect our young state against the threatening Polish danger. Under the so-called Peking Plan, 3 Polish destroyers of the small Polish Navy departed from Poland and headed to Britain so they would not be sunk or captured when Germany would decide to invade Poland. Hitler's reply to Britain arrived that night. He demanded the return of Danzig and the Polish corridor, that narrow land region which had made East Prussia into a German exclave without a land connection to Germany, and wrote that Germany could no longer share Britain's view that these grave differences can be resolved by way of direct negotiations. But contradicting this stark reminder to Britain, Hitler wrote that Germany was prepared to enter direct negotiations to give the British government and the British nation a proof of the sincerity of Germany's intentions to enter into a lasting friendship with Great Britain. I'm afraid that he was trying to deceive Ambassador Henderson and the British government. On August the 30th, 1939, which was a Wednesday, as far as I can remember from that Finnish version of the Chronicle of the 20th century, Poland closed the Polish corridor. In other words, prevented the traffic of Germans across the Polish corridor from the mainland regions of Germany to East Prussia. Poland also ordered a partial mobilization. Ambassador Henderson handed the German Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop the British government's reply at midnight. Although the British government wanted to have improved relations with Germany, it declared that it could not sacrifice the interests of other friends in order to obtain that improvement. On Thursday, August the 31st, 1939, the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union, meaning the country's so-called federal parliament, which of course was little more than a rubber stamp of the communist dictator Stalin's and Politburo's and government's decisions, which usually were approved unanimously without a single dissenting vote, ratified the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The British Royal Navy was mobilized and Army and Royal Force reserves were called up. At 11:07 a.m. British time, an official order was given in Britain to evacuate civilians from cities and towns that were likely targets for enemy bombing. Mostly school children were evacuated. Over the next few days, nearly 3 million people would be relocated. At 12:30 p.m. Central European Time, Hitler issued Directive Number 1, ordering an attack on Poland to begin on September the 1st at 4:45 a.m., claiming that all the political possibilities of disposing by peaceful means of a situation on the eastern frontier which was intolerable had been exhausted. At 6:15 p.m. German time, or Central European Time, the German Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop met the Polish ambassador to Germany, Mr. Józef Lipski, over 5 hours after Lipski had requested such an encounter. Lipski said that the Polish government would be making a formal reply about direct negotiations in the next few hours. In order to basically preempt and make unnecessary the meeting, von Ribbentrop asked Lipski if he had the direct power to negotiate. Lipski admitted that at that moment he did not have such a power. Von Ribbentrop said, in that case, there is nothing to discuss, or nothing more to discuss. This is from the first volume of an English language book on the Second World War. Ambassador Lipski returned to the Polish embassy in Berlin and found that his telephone line had been cut. On the evening of August the 31st, as a part of the Operation Himmler, Nazis posing as Poles seized or pretended to seize the Gliwice radio station in Upper Silesia near the German-Polish border and broadcast a brief anti-German message in Polish calling on the Poles living on the German side of the border in Upper Silesia to rise up against the Nazi Germans. At 9:00 p.m. sharp, Central European Time, German radio interrupted regular programming to present the government's 16-point proposal for Poland. The demand for the restoration of Danzig to Germany was maintained, but the question of the Polish corridor was now to be settled by a plebiscite or referendum. However, in that plebiscite, the remaining German residents of the corridor and their descendants, the descendants of former or pre-1918 residents, if I remember correctly from another Wikipedia article, they would be given the vote, while at that time current Polish residents would have been deprived of the vote, which of course would not have resulted in a free and fair plebiscite anyway. But since the telecommunications between Germany and Poland had already been cut, the Polish government never heard the proposal